Hello guys, welcome back to our channel. Today we start our new story, and if you like our old story 10, don't forget to like, subscribe. Now start our story. I've always associated my birthday with that depressing time of year where a cozy autumn turns into an early winter decay day where colorful leaves die, leaving a withered brown shell behind. Still, people are expected to celebrate the birthdays. It's strange if one doesn't. My fiancé recently asked me why I never celebrate my birthday, and it's a hard one to explain when you've been through something traumatic. Everything sort of brings you back to that moment one way or another, and while I'd love to tell her about it, I don't think I can without sounding like a maniac. I thought I'd start by telling my story anonymously and sort of go from there. It was the year I turned 13. Since You've Been Gone was blasting on the radio every hour of the day. My friends and I were quoting How I Met Your Mother religiously. It was a good time to be a kid. Since my birthday was in the middle of the school week, my big birthday plans were postponed until the upcoming weekend. Still, I couldn't complain. Birthday cake on a Tuesday didn't sound all that bad. I got home, had a small celebration with my parents, and opened a few presents. 2 new games from my PlayStation 2 score. I finished up my homework and browsed the net for a few hours ahead of my scheduled bedtime, when there was a knock at the door. We rarely had visitors, so to have somebody knocking at our door at 10 p.m. was unusual, to say the least. My parents had already opened the door. By the time I was halfway down the stairs, there was a man in a fancy jacket with a clipboard standing outside along with two armed guards. I sort of fell into the middle of the conversation. So we need you to sign the consent form and we'll get started. The clipboard man said, any questions? This can't be legal. My mom said, on what kind of authority are you, ma'am? This is an emergency. We've been authorized to bring anyone and everyone if need be, but I promise you it'll be less pleasant experience than what you could achieve here in the comfort of your own home. As the discussion continued, the armed men pushed into the house. They sort of had a checklist they were going through, asking questions as they poked and prodded. Someone mentioned a satellite phone, which we didn't have. I hurried back upstairs. From my window I could see them putting wheel locks on our car. They were testing some sort of electrical equipment too, and as they did I could see the internet connection on my computer disappear. My cell phone lost all bars, and while I didn't check, I suspected they'd done something to our landline as well. They were isolating us, putting us under some sort of lockdown. I still don't have the slightest idea of who these people were. There were no patches, badges, ranks, or symbols, just a bunch of serious-looking men in windbreakers with visible gun holsters. After a few minutes, one of the men entered my room. My parents were worried sick, but were told to wait outside. The man was about 6 feet 4 inches and had the look of someone who could kill me with his bare teeth if need be. Without a word, he started to go through my things. You got any walkie-talkies? He asked. Any radio science projects? Something like that. Nope, I said, shaking my head. I got a PlayStation 2 that can go online. Right, I never got the chance to answer before. My mom added, we don't let him play online games. She said it can't do that, as if to make sure. He pulled the power cable and dropped it into a sealed bag, along with various knickknacks and keys they collected. They weren't taking any chances, and I wasn't playing my new games anytime soon. It seemed as they finished up their impromptu house inspection, we were asked to gather downstairs. The fancy man with a clipboard cleared his throat in the room, felt deathly silent. Even my dad, who was usually a very assertive man, didn't have much to add to the conversation. That's how you knew it was serious. For 72 hours this and surrounding neighborhoods are under lockdown. The man explained there was a localized problem related to a recent geological event which has caused some unexplained issues. I'm sure you've noticed some minor oddities as of late, like what my dad added, milk turning sour, houseplants getting a strange color tint, swarms of frogs cluttering the roads. My parents said nothing, but they nodded. Perhaps they'd seen something I hadn't. The man put his clipboard as he explained calmly, "You've been exposed to something, into a chemical. It reacts violently to the release of certain hormones which are associated with deep REM sleep. To ensure your safety, we are currently enforcing a temporary 72-hour ban of sleep." Excuse me. My dad took a step forward, but one of the armed men responded in kind. They both stopped before it had the chance to escalate. Exposure was approximately 9 hours ago, meaning you have about 63 hours left to go. That'll be approximately 1 p.m. on Friday. There's no way we can. This is non-negotiable. This is a matter of your security, sir. We have an emergency health service site, but I can promise you that it won't be pleasant. You'll be chemically induced into sleeplessness for the full duration of exposure until the event has passed. It can cause long-lasting brain damage. We are handed a folder each explaining our responsibilities and rights. An unmarked red folder with 3 papers. 1 explaining their right to force is upon us, another explaining that we'd already signed the consent papers, and a third one was a form explaining exactly when we could go to sleep. There was also an inventory form explaining the items we were to have returned. At the end of the containment, they left a box of 50 glass vials, some kind of 4-hour booster shots. The man explained how underage children were not to take more than once every several hours, and that my mother, if pregnant, shouldn't take any at all. Luckily my mom wasn't pregnant. I'm an only child. We also giving fiber bars with some kind of hormone supplement, unmarked and unbranded, but warm. Maybe they were made recently. The packaging was sloppy at best. The fancy man was trying his best to explain, and I could see my parents were eager to listen to him, but I barely understood half of it. Instead I looked at the armed guards. They looked exhausted. Maybe they too weren't allowed to sleep. One of them had his mouth open and almost drool, blinking one eye at a time. I could have sworn he nodded off for a second, which prompted him to take a walk outside. I don't know if we can do this, my mother complained. It's a lot to ask. We've only just, if at any moment you can't do this, you need to call this number. It's the only number that works, the man said, pointing to the final line on the final paper of the folder. If someone falls asleep and can't be awakened within a few minutes, they're in terrible danger. If that happens, try to keep them awake by any means until we can get here to pick them up, and then they'll be taken to our site in Mianto, where they'll be chemically induced to stay awake. So what exactly happens if someone doesn't make it? My mom asked. If we all just fall asleep. The man shook his head, tapping the clipboard with his pen. They will probably die. Others might too. While they went into the kitchen to explain some details, the angry-looking guard approached me with the sealed bag, handing me back my PlayStation 2 power cable. He gave me a pat on the shoulder. I checked with the tech team. He said, "You're good to go, and happy birthday." I'd almost forgotten that it was my birthday. I appreciated the gesture, but I just couldn't bring myself to smile. I had too many questions bubbling in the back of my head, and I was too afraid to speak. They probably talked for another 20 minutes or so before the men left, leaving my parents and I alone in the kitchen. My mother was smoking under the kitchen fan. I'd only seen her smoke 2 times, once when she lost her job and another time when my father got sick. Smoking in the kitchen was a surefire way to tell something was wrong. Dad was sitting with his arms crossed, looking at the box of booster shots. "This is no joke," my dad finally said. "This is very serious. We're all going to need to help each other to get through this." Mom said nothing, but I could see her hands trembling. She'd been crying. She was shaking so much that the ash from her cigarette didn't reach the ashtray. It just plopped down on the stove. "We can't be alone," Dad continued. "We're going to do our best to keep busy. You can play as many games as you want, but you can't fall asleep." They gave me back my power cable. I said, "Does that mean it's okay for me to use the PlayStation?" "It's okay," my mom coughed. "It's okay, honey, play your games." For those first few hours I didn't understand what the big deal was. No more school for the rest of the week. No Bedtime and unlimited screen time that didn't sound too bad to me. I gamed late into the night slide to when Ratchet and Clank were on the menu and I had a blast. I got some snacks along with one of those fiber bars. They tasted like twigs and raisins, but it made my brain calm, not tired, but it made it easier to focus. It also made it harder to shut my eyes, making my eyelids itch. All lights in the house were kept on all throughout the night. Mom and Dad kept playing music on the downstairs stereo, and they desperately tried to keep me engaged. I was engaged enough just playing games, so I think it was more of their benefit rather than mine. At 5 a.m. Dad took his first booster shot. I could hear it all the way from upstairs. He was cussing pretty hard. Apparently those things tasted like a mix of stale rice and death. Mom took her first boost about half an hour later, but she mixed it with orange juice. Apparently that helped. By 7 o'clock a.m. even I was feeling it. I'd never been up all night playing games like that on a school day before. Sure, I'd pulled all night or with my friends, but it was usually something we prepared for, so by early morning I could feel myself nodding off. My parents were checking in on me every now and then and decided to act. We were having family breakfast, pretending as if we'd already slept. You're always cranking the morning, Mom said. Try to imagine this is just that, another cranky morning. I knew for a fact that they slipped one of those boosters into my cereal, saw 3 empty vials on the counter, and I knew none of them had taken a second one yet. Still I had little choice but to try. We weren't even halfway through the containment yet. As we finished our breakfast we could hear commotion outside. I was upstairs brushing my teeth, watching through the hallway window. It was our neighbor's Larry Peterson, the 55-year-old man who worked the fishing supplies at the local mini mall, crawled out his front door. He was throwing up something black and blue onto the pavement. I'd never seen this man do anything more physically straining than trying to start a lawn mower, and now he was crawling on all fours like his life depended on it. I could hear his wife calling out from inside. She was screaming at him, but I couldn't hear what. Larry got up and almost leapt into the back of his pickup truck in a show of athleticism I'd never seen from him before. It wasn't until his wife got out of the house that I could hear what she was saying. Larry, she cried. Larry, wake up. I saw Larry Peterson grab a wrench, get out of the truck, and grab his wife by the hair. Suddenly a hand covered my eyes as my father dragged me away from the window. I could hear a scream turned into a gargle, followed by a hearty laugh, one I heard 1,000 times before. The same kind of laugh Larry Peterson would chuckle up whenever my dad tried to pull off a bad pun. My mind painted me a picture of what happened, and it wasn't pretty. My dad spun me around and stared into my eyes. I could tell he wasn't himself. There were lines across his face that I hadn't seen before. Stay with me, and Mommy said, don't look outside. People are getting sick. Are we getting sick, Dad? I asked, a yawn escaping me. He shook me a little, as if to make sure I was paying attention. We'll be fine, he said. It's just a matter of time, but I don't want you to see people getting hurt. Larry isn't feeling well. There was a knock on the front door. Dad took point as Mom hid in the bedroom. I remember standing on the top of the stairs looking over the railing to the floor below. There was a violent, angry pounding on the door. Larry Peterson's soft chuckle coming from the other side. He didn't say anything, he just pounded on the door with his wrench, laughing as he tried to get in. He went around the house rattling our windows. He didn't get far before we could hear a car roll up. There was a popping sound, but not like a gunshot. I think they tossed him. By the time I could hear Larry Peterson get dragged off, my mom had come upstairs with a smile taped to her face, asking me to show her how far I'd gotten my new fancy video game. She was clearly trying to keep me distracted, but I didn't mind. At that point I wanted desperately to be distracted. I could imagine Larry Peterson on the other side of the front door, his white t-shirt stained with a strange black and blue goo, he thrown up, wielding that wrench with a manic grip. The thing was at large, my arms in solid metal. I never considered it a weapon, but thinking about it made my blood run cold. Had he really killed Mrs. Peterson. Why Mom and I spent the next few hours playing video games. We also made a plan. We went through our old DVDs and decided on a watching schedule. She'd originally planned a walk, but now we weren't to leave the house. She didn't want to say why, but I had the feeling that there was something outside the Petersons' house that she didn't want me to see. Blood stains. Maybe I was too afraid to find out. My parents tried their best to keep the mood up, but I could tell it was getting to them. My dad was mostly just standing there leaning against the door, staring straight ahead like in a trance. Mom tried to occupy herself by playing games and watching DVDs with me, but she was counting the minutes until she could get her next booster shot. I wasn't eager to take one. They made my stomach all queasy. We made it all the way until noon. Dad was having trouble staying up and kept washing his head with cold water. He tried to keep busy doing housework that he'd keep for a rainy day, but there was a constant distractions. We could hear sirens in the distance, and at one point there was someone spraying our front door and windows with a high-pressed water hose, probably to wash away the last traces of Larry Peterson. There were dog patrols going up and down the streets, along with the occasional phone call. The one number that so worked where someone called to make sure we were all awake and accounted for by dinner time. Mom was having stomach troubles. Her shaking had gotten worse and she was having trouble with sudden change of smells. Dad kept rubbing his eyes and checking his watch, getting up every 10 minutes or so just to move around. We decided that we were going to play board games after dinner, but Mom was having trouble keeping herself from throwing up. We ended up just reheating a lasagna from a few days back. I didn't mind. Mom made amazing lasagna, but my appetite was quickly lost when I saw my mother barely keeping it together. She kept drooling and making this weird chugging sound. She was blinking slower and slower. Dad tried to get her to eat one of those fiber bars, but she just ran out of the kitchen, locking herself in the bathroom. It was touch and go for a while. I could feel my heart racing as Dad tried to convince her to unlock the door, but she just couldn't do it. After a while she stopped responding. Dad had to break the handle with a hammer, but it was too late. She was already sleeping. I could hear it through the front door as the door burst open. Mom had only been asleep for a couple seconds, a minute at most, but she was sitting on the toilet, her head leaning back, and something was coming out of her mouth, black and blue fingertips poking out over the edge of her lips. Her throat muted. The moment Dad grabbed her, she tipped her head forward, coughing. Dad washed her face in the sink while yelling at me to wait in the other room for a few minutes. I was just sitting there ready to run or hide. It must have been too late. I figured she could have already been affected like Larry Peterson. I could hear them arguing in the other room, and as their voices went from angry to desperate to sad, I didn't know what to do. When they finally returned, they sat me down to explain that we were going to be fine, that we were almost halfway through, and that we were in the home stretch. They were so kind, warm and careful in the way they explained it, but my mind was at 000 miles away. I had trouble focusing, and all I could think about was that strange noise I kept hearing in the background. Something outside. Dad was halfway through explaining how we weren't going to lock our bathroom doors anymore when something in me screamed at me to react. It was just a slight click, but it was clear as day. Maybe it was those booster shots, but I kept hyper-focusing on little details rather than big picture stuff like an actual conversation taking place in front of me. I closed my eyes, and no less than a second later there was a loud bang. Someone was shooting at us. It was only a couple of shots, but we dropped to the ground. One shot got lodged in the front door while the other cracked the kitchen window. There were loud voices outside laughing hysterically. They were talking but barely making any sense. One of them sounded like she was trying to talk with food in her mouth. Mom and Dad kept quiet as two more shots popped off. One of them hitting the kitchen light, but an electric spark it gave out blocking out most of the kitchen. I could hear someone running and laughing as they continued down the street. In the distance there were more gunfire, maybe someone responding in kind. "We can't stay here," Mom whispered. "We got to call them." "You want to go to where they put Larry?" Dad answered. "To be put in a hospital full of these people there shooting at us. We can't just..." Mom quieted down and looked at me. She and Dad excused themselves to talking private while I was asked to move upstairs. I was to stay away from windows and I couldn't sit or lie down. It'd be up to check on me in a bit, but of course I was too curious. While still hearing them argue downstairs, I checked in. Upstairs window I could see pretty far down the street, and in the distance I could make out a car stalling on the side of the road. The headlights were still on, but it was surrounded by at least 6 people. 2 of them were dressed like the armed guards we'd seen earlier. It took me a while to realize there was an old man sitting in the car. Had seen him around a couple times, but I didn't know his name. The surrounding people were trying to crack the car windows with various weapons: tire irons, bricks, hammers, lead pipes, whatever they could get their hands on. It didn't take them long to break through. They reached in to pull the man out. It was far too off for me to hear the screams, but I could vaguely see what they were doing. They held him down and covered his face with their hands, his eyes, his mouth, his ears, leaving only his nose to breathe through. Then they just sat there. It took me a moment to realize what they were doing. They were forcing him to sleep. After a few minutes they let go of him. The old man slowly stood up, leaning against his car, and started to dry heave. After a while, the same blue and black goo that I had seen from Larry Peterson started pouring out of his mouth, stopping only as he coughed up some kind of clot that could barely fit in his mouth, a clot that moved as he straightened his back. He looked at the strange group and they walked down the street together. Some jogged, some sprinted, one of them crawled, but it looked like he held on to something with his teeth. Either that or something was coming out of his mouth, something long. As I hurried down the street, I could hear more gunfire in the distance coming from another way I could see. That's a knot for today, guys. We meet you in the part 2 of same story. Until, please like, subscribe to our channel.